You are on.
Okay, so why don't you give us your name, the position you're running for, and why you're running?
Great.
Up to 5 minutes.
Excellent. I'm Barry Smitherman, and I thank you all for allowing me to be here, have this conversation with you. I'm running for Attorney General. I am currently the chairman of the Texas Railroad Commission. I was appointed to this position in July of 2011 to fill a vacancy, and then elected in the fall of 2012 in my own right to serve out the remaining 2 years. So my term expires at the end of this year. I was elected with 74% of the vote. I've also been chairman of the Public Utility Commission for 7.5 years. I was a prosecutor in the Harris County DA's office before going to the PUC, and I spent 17 years as a private attorney and businessman, most of it here in Houston, but some in Dallas as well. I bring to this job a unique set of skills and strengths, which is what the Attorney General's office needs. I have a proven record of leadership at the Railroad Commission and leadership at the PUC. Over the 10 years that I've had these two positions, and by the way, I'm the only person in Texas history to lead both of them, we have improved performance, we have returned taxpayer dollars back, we have done it with fewer people at the PUC, for example. When I got there, we had 250 people. When I left, we had 175. Over that 7.5 year period, we returned over $100 million back to the legislature that they had appropriated, but we did not spend. The same thing at the Railroad Commission. We underspent our budget that had been allocated to us. For this year, for this biennium, we are using less taxpayer dollars than we did before. And in my personal office, none of my people have taken a raise, and we have not increased our budget in my personal office. But we've also improved performance. When I arrived at the Railroad Commission, it was taking us weeks, if not months, to turn around an oil and gas drilling permit. It was taking 5 years to complete a surface mining permit. Now it takes 270 days for our surface mining permit. My goal is to get that down to 6 months, if not less, and 3 days for us to do an oil and gas drilling permit. We also had a backlog of 900 disposal well applications. We basically chopped that down, and we are current. We'll produce more oil and gas, or certainly more oil this year than we have in 30 years. And permitting for oil and gas permits over the last 2.5 years is a record that is only bested by the mid-'80s.
That's excellent.
So I bring this leadership to the Attorney General's office because it is a giant agency, 4,200 employees and a $500 million a year budget. It needs a leadership. It doesn't need a legislator or somebody who writes wills or contracts for a living. I also, as I mentioned earlier, was in the Harris County DA's office. That was a second career for me. I had intended to be there for a long time, but during my brief period of time there, I prosecuted DWIs and family assaults, and I'm the only one in this race that's prosecuted a criminal case. That's important because one of my priorities at the Attorney General's office is going to be prosecuting crime along the border. I have made this a commitment. We're going to take some of our employees and we're going to work with local DAs, law enforcement and investigators to prosecute crime. Plain old crime, assault, DWI, trespass, all the things that are on the books right now. We don't need more laws. We need to prosecute the ones that we have presently. And I'm uniquely qualified to do that because of my experience in the DA's office. I'm a CHL holder, the only one in this race. I am endorsed by a wide range of people. You can see them on barryfortexas.com. I'm endorsed by Texas Right to Life and Texas Alliance for Life. I'm the only candidate with both those endorsements. Gun Rights of America, Alice Linehan, who is an education expert, Donna Gardner, who's also an education expert, but also sheriffs around our state. 5 sheriffs have recently endorsed me from West Texas. And I have the support of the Tri-County Tea Party, which is up in the Cleveland area. I won the Ellis County straw poll, Tea Party straw poll just last week. And I have the support of business groups like the Greater Houston Home Builders and the Houston automobile dealers. So I present what I believe is strengths across the board to be your next Attorney General.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
What, right on 5 minutes too.
I had my eye on the timer.
Okay, we got Brian.
So tell me about the office. You're in the Railroad Commission right now, right?
Right.
You deal with oil and gas mainly.
Oil and gas, pipelines, and coal mining, surface mining for coal.
And so I've been hearing that the technology is really old and it needs to be updated very severely, even though it's got a lot of money coming in from all the revenues. Kind of inform us on that.
We're actually in the process of upgrading all of our software and hardware at the Railroad Commission. When I arrived there and turned on my desktop, we had a computer program on there that I think I used at Texas A&M in 1978. It was horrible. We occasionally had to shut down our server every day to catch up with the backlog of permit applications that came in the day before. It was ridiculous. So this past legislature, we went to the legislature and asked them to appropriate to us surplus money that was in the Oil and Gas Regulatory Cleanup Fund. That is a fund that was established in the 2011 session. It is a fee on oil and gas companies. It had generated more money than anybody anticipated, but in order to get it, we had to get the legislature's blessing to give it back to us. So they appropriated about $18 million. That upgrade is in process right now, and it is almost complete. So when we have this done, we'll have eliminated a lot of human keystroking on applications, a lot of regular mail back and forth, even some emailing, where an operator can go in and put their applications in online, see the progress of them, and a person, whether it's a mineral interest owner, a landowner, or an operator, can navigate our website and find any document that's been filed without having to hire an attorney in Austin to go down and look in the file room and find it.
Okay.
Follow on with that. It's 136. Said you're upgrading the software. Who's the vendor on that?
We have an IT department that put it out for bid. I think we got 10 qualified bids. We chose the lowest qualified bid. I'd have to get back to you on exactly who the vendor is.
Okay. It's not.
Are they friends of Michelle Obama,
I hope not.
the vendor?
I hope not.
No.
You know, we have a staff, and I delegate to them to make the right choice.
Mm.
And the bid that is the lowest and most qualified is the one we have to take. Now, if they don't deliver, we're going to jerk it away from them real quick, and we'll go to the second lowest bid. But since we're using dollars appropriated back to us, we, to some degree, have our hands tied on who we can choose.
Right. Okay. I'm going to turn specifically to the job of the Attorney General. Now, of course, right now and over the next 2 years for sure, Obamacare is going to be a screaming issue. So my question is, as our Attorney General, what can you do to help us deal with the fact that the built-in inequities, in other words, states with federal exchanges, people getting my tax dollars for subsidies when the law doesn't allow that. Someone such as myself, I go to the VA as a veteran, but then for my wife and my daughter and other citizens, male citizens, they're going to have to buy coverage that I don't get from, the VA doesn't give me offer birth control or anything like that. But just the inequities nationwide. But what can we do with you as our Attorney General to protect us from the disaster that Obamacare is bringing to our country? At least where Texas is concerned.
Yeah, Ted Cruz was right. It needs to be defunded. Anytime you have the government taking over that big of a segment of the economy, it always goes badly. Back in the early 90s, I went to the Soviet Union with the State Department goodwill trip, and I saw for myself what happens when a government controls all the means of economy, and it never works out well. So what we have to do is we have to try to stop it at every turn from the Attorney General's office. So that's going to mean a series of lawsuits Perhaps we can get some injunctions to prohibit implementation of it. Of course, the best thing that could happen would be for it to be defunded at the federal level so that there's no money associated with it. But we've got to go in and use every tool that we have available for us. I've sued the Obama EPA 7 times already, working with Greg Abbott, so I have a close working relationship.
Was
with
that Texas
office.
alone, or did y'all work with other state attorneys?
That is Texas. Those 7 are Texas as the lead plaintiff
Okay.
on those suits.
Were those railroad commission cases?
Those were both Railroad Commission
Right.
and at PUC, and they were all related toward environmental air quality regulations that we believe was not grounded in science or frankly grounded in law. So I can go into those in some detail with you. So I have a history of fighting Obama already. On Obamacare, of course, January 1st was a big day. Medicaid has already effectively put parts of Obamacare into place because docs are presently restricted on what they can charge and get reimbursed from Medicaid. And I spoke with a doc the other night who told me that she cannot give away her service for free because that's a violation of her
Yeah.
operating agreement. So we're going to have to, James, we're going to have to use every available means to stop Obamacare. I think frankly it's a violation of the Commerce Clause. I think this administration has used the Commerce Clause incorrectly to try to force us to buy a product, when in reality the Commerce Clause was designed to prohibit states from erecting barriers for industries and businesses in other states to do business in that state.
How are they able to even require us to buy a contract for their product? When, you know, if it's something that's constitutional, should we all have to buy the same thing? How do you justify doing it differently?
I don't see how you can justify it because we've never had a requirement to buy a product.
Right.
And of course, Justice Roberts said that it's a tax and so
Yeah.
it's okay. Now, there's a case coming out of Houston, which is headed to the Fifth Circuit, that Dr. Hotze is the petitioner on, that challenges Obamacare on constitutional grounds because it did not originate in the House of Representatives and it is a tax.
Yeah.
And he survived on procedural grounds. Federal District Judge Nancy Atlas here in Houston, and now he can appeal that case to the Fifth Circuit, which is where we wanted to get Obamacare all along, and we have a reasonable chance, I think, in the Fifth Circuit.
Would you join that case as attorney?
In fact, I'm
general?
working on an amicus brief right now
Okay.
from my own seat. When I am the Attorney General, if that case is still going forward, absolutely.
Okay.
Good.
Thank you.
Okay, first question on page 2 is about the greatest corruption that exists in state government, and you said in the state legislature, which your explanation convinced me. To me, one of the biggest problems with corruption in the state legislature, or at least a sizable one, has to do with government bodies lobbying with taxpayer dollars, counties, cities, you name it. There's been a lot of talk about that needs to be put a stop to, but I haven't seen any motion. If you could comment on that. And also, there are other instances of fraud. They may not be the top one like you identified, but you know, we hear commonly about Medicaid fraud. And another one that I'd be interested in hearing your comments on is, maybe you don't call it fraud, but it looks like fraud to me, and that's the funding that the ESCs demanded from school districts for C-SCOPE.
Yeah.
As the chairman of the Railroad Commission and chairman of the PUC, I am different from legislators in that I cannot meet with my colleagues behind closed doors. We can only meet in a duly designated and posted open meeting.
Right.
So there is no behind the scenes, behind back doors, closeted smoke-filled room negotiations that happen in the legislature. And one of the challenges, I think, with committees in the House and in the Senate is they have the opportunity to visit with each other before they make a vote. And in many ways, it would appear as if there's been prior discussion before the public actually sees the vote being done. That's never been the case as far as I'm concerned. Public entities using your taxpayer dollars to lobby is wrong. I mean, it should, the law would have to be changed for the Attorney General to weigh in on it. Remember, We're law enforcers, we're not law makers. And so if we were able to get that amended or changed through the legislature, I'd be the first one to go to the front of the line and enforce it. But public bodies should only inform and be resource material for legislators, not use your taxpayer dollars to lobby. Medicaid fraud is a big issue, and the Attorney General's office is presently involved in that. In fact, on my way down here, I met with the district attorney in Brenham, and she is relatively new, was elected in 2012, and was telling me about the positive experience of an attorney with the AG's office working with her office to prosecute Medicaid fraud, because she doesn't do it all the time and she doesn't have the resources to do it. So it should be a high priority. It'll continue to be a high priority. When that happens, everybody gets ripped off. You're paying money for service that's not provided, and we need to start putting some people in jail for it.
Okay. And the ESCs?
Say that-
Cisco?
Yes, I've been at the forefront of this with Alice Linehan and Donna Gardner. It is a real problem that school districts are using race to the top dollars now to justify using C-scope or Common Core curricula in their schools. House Bill 462, which was passed last session, prohibits the use of Common Core standards, but we're afraid that they're coming in the back door by teachers using them as supplemental material or
Yeah.
saying, well, it wasn't mandated to me by the school district to
Right.
use it, I'm just doing it on my own. And that's certainly not within the spirit of the law.
Okay.
All
Go
right.
ahead, Ken.
I guess my question is, it seems like you've only been at the Railroad Commission for a relatively short time. And it kind of comes to the question of, well, why did you go there in the first place? It seems, a skeptic, I guess, would say that maybe you just went there to try to launch your statewide career. But it seems like you've been there, you haven't had time to actually affect change. So why did you go there and?
Actually, we have affected change.
Okay.
And I talked about it in my opening comments. My 7.5 years at the PUC really turned that agency around. When I got there, it was not operating well, and it was operating with too many people. And we were tasked with overseeing the transition of the Texas electric market from a monopoly-provided utility model to the free market that it is today. And now we have the lowest electric rates in Texas that we've had in 11 years. So we cleaned that place up, and it was operating with fewer people at a higher level when I left. The Railroad Commission in the spring of 2011 was a disaster. It was going through sunset review at the legislature, and the legislators were so angry at the Railroad Commission. Two of the commissioners were running against each other for the U.S. Senate. No one was minding the store. The executive director had no direction, and there was serious contemplation about taking the duties of the Railroad Commission and giving some of them to the PUC, some of them to the TCEQ. In fact, one legislative report said the PUC is so well run, we are going to take some of the Railroad Commission stuff and give it to the PUC. And I like that because I was at the PUC at the time. After I came to the Railroad Commission, I said, give us an opportunity to fix it. And the first thing that I did when I became chairman was to accept the resignation of our executive director. And we went out and hired better leadership, and we've been replacing people in the 1 down and 2 down level. And you can ask anybody who deals with the Railroad Commission now that it is operating at a very high level. When I was in private business, one of the things I did was to clean up departments and make them run better. And so I did that at the PUC, I did it at the Railroad Commission. It is, for the most part, it is fixed and running well. And this is an opportunity for me to take my leadership skills to an even bigger agency with an even bigger budget.
Do you support smart meters?
The smart meter legislation and history is important to look at to figure out where we go from here. In 2005 and 2007, bills were passed by the legislature, which both of my opponents voted for, both times. The first bill said that the utilities could charge a fee, and if they came in to ask for a fee to put the meters in, the PUC shall approve. The second bill was passed in 2007 and said it's the intent of the legislature that smart metering devices be deployed as rapidly as possible. During this time, people raised some concerns at the PUC about the reliability of the meters, about whether they were accurate, but nobody raised any health concerns. Since that time, people have. And I've worked with Kathy Adams back in 2011 and with Beth Beazle on smart meter opt-out legislation, and Senator Corona carried that bill this past session. It got out of his committee, but it never was heard on the Senate floor, and there was no companion in the House. And I wondered why one of my opponents, who's a senator, didn't try to advance this bill on the Senate floor. I, on the other hand, have publicly said to my former colleagues at the PUC that I think people who don't want a smart meter shouldn't have to have one. They should be able to opt out. And the PUC has agreed with that. Now they're working on what they're going to charge, if anything. I recommended that they not charge anything. Some people like smart meters, others don't. So you ought to have the option to have it or not. And I am working with a lot of grassroots on trying to give people the power to opt out. And we have a lot of material on this if you'd like to see it.
One of my concerns with the smart meter has been that it's a two-way communication. Not only can they read what your meter is saying, now I'm fine with that part. The part I don't like is if they can regulate what your meter, what is metered into your house. That's where I would have a problem. And so I don't know enough about the technology, but I should think we would have legislation that would prohibit that.
Today, the only way you can get your power cut off is if you don't pay your bill. And that's always been the case. You
And
don't
it
pay
should
your bill.
always be the case.
Right. Though, I can tell you from my time at the PUC, there were many people that used very ingenious schemes to steal electricity. And the old mechanical meters are easier to trick than the new meters are. But nevertheless, if you don't pay, you shouldn't get power. And if you don't want the meter, you shouldn't have to have the meter. Some people don't mind them. If you like skipping or jumping from one retail electric provider to another, which many people do, some people will switch every 3 months because they diligently shop for the cheapest price. The meter enables you to make that switch more easily. In fact, you can make it the same day. But if that's not what you want to do, then you should have the option not to have one.
So back on this Obama, really not really Obamacare, but federal regulation and federal direction in Texas. Okay, great. The Attorney General sues Texas, but what happens with the federal court? Federal employees paid for by federal dollars, and they're not really Texans in the sense that it's a biased court. I mean, it's a federal court. What there? I mean, what do you do? I mean, so you sue and you lose, and it's not right. You get cheated. You take it on the chin, or at what point do you do more than sue and lose?
Well, from the Attorney General's seat, the courthouse has become our last venue of opportunity. And we're actually having some success. On these 7 lawsuits against the EPA, 4 of them will be heard on February the 24th. These are the greenhouse gas regulations that we've led the charge against. And it's remarkable that we've gotten the case this far, that we were granted cert by the U.S. Supreme Court. And we're going to make the argument that the Clean Air Act does not empower the EPA to regulate stationary sources of CO2. It may with regard to mobile sources, that's in debate, but clearly not with stationary sources. So I think we have a reasonable opportunity of winning that suit. we argued a case back in December on the cross-state air pollution rule. That was the rule that singled out Texas for disproportionate decreases in ozone-forming material, in spite of the fact that we have made dramatic reductions in cleaning up our air.
Yeah, but my point or question, here, okay, let me ask you a question for him. So, do you think that the U.S. Constitution was, and the Supreme Court is something where it can make Texas behave the way that the rest of the state or the legislators, you know, the U.S. Congress wants Texas to behave, or, you know, it gets into the states' rights issue.
It's a 10th Amendment issue.
So how far are you pushing?
Well, clearly, this administration and to some degree this Supreme Court continue to overreach by assuming responsibility for duties and actions that we didn't empower them with. The 10th Amendment says we give to the federal government these rights and responsibilities. These are the things we want you to do for us. And that is completely morphed into the federal government now being responsible for almost everything, healthcare, education, and other, which is not what the framers had in mind. I think we have to continue to fight on this in the courts. That's what the AG does. We will win some of these cases. I am concerned about the Supreme Court because the 4 liberals vote in lockstep. They are not open to persuasion. They're not open to changing. And then we've got Justice Roberts and Justice Kennedy that appear to be swing votes. And so we go into it with sort of a 4 liberal, 3 conservative lineup, hoping that Roberts and Kennedy will side with us. And this is what we do at the Attorney General's office. If the state wants to pass nullification, or they want to try to have any other mechanism for saying that Texas is not going to abide by federal law or by the decisions of the Supreme Court, and they pass those at the state, of course, I'll enforce that law.
Okay, let me ask it a different way. So when Roe v. Wade issue came up in 1973, and Texas went to and appealed it, took it to the Supreme Court, why even go there? Why not just have it settled here in Texas, and who cares what the federal government says? Because, it does not fall within the authority given to, that the states gave the federal government. So why even take it to that level? Why not just say, okay, Texas is going to do the way we want, and an individual cannot appeal against a state. Because the Constitution is so, the Supreme Court is so, from my view, is where 2 states the Supreme Court can duke out, an argument between 2 states, not between a Texan and the state of Texas.
Yeah, I mean, diversity of citizenship is one of the jurisdictions for the federal courts, but in the Roe case, which was tragically decided, and I've read that case over and over. In fact, today I was at the Texas Alliance for Life Leadership Circle, and of course, in February we will celebrate the 41st anniversary of the Roe decision. And if you go back and read that case, you'll see an incredible 2,000-year recitation of not only medical models and accepted medical practice, but also common law. And then on a dime, the justices turn and say, but we're going to allow unfettered right to abortion through the entire pregnancy. And to some degree, they base it upon a recently passed 1969, 1970 vintage law in the UK that allowed for more liberal laws on abortions. That got to the Supreme Court because the petitioner claimed that it was a violation of her constitutional rights, an invasion of her privacy, which I think the Supreme Court contorted. That is the place where the Attorney General's office wages battle. It is in the courts. If the legislature wants to do something else, if they want to try to separate us from the federal government or nullify a law or say we're going to be responsible for something in our state and you can't make us do it any other way, I'll be right there behind them.
Okay.
I want to ask a question, it may be quick. in which case I'll have a second. But where, on your response to the American law and American courts, you said certainly only American law. Where it gets into a gray area, and there's precedent, is when you have, say, a divorce in a couple that got married in the Catholic Church. And part of their getting married in the Catholic Church with the blessing of the priest is they have to sign a covenant that the children, the fruit of that union, will be raised in the Catholic Church. Then in a divorce, if one of the parties has left the Catholic Church, the one that's still in has used that agreement as the basis for determining custody. Basically, the parent that remains Catholic would retain the children in order to enforce that covenant. Well, no one has really said that was wrong or unconstitutional or a violation of anything. So now we get into Sharia law, which has all kinds of implications, dealing with inheritance, certainly dealing with custody. What should we do as Attorney General? What do you think your role would be in basically trying to prevent either religious covenants of whatever kind be enforced by a court? A sectarian, I mean, not sectarian, is that the right term?
Secular.
Yeah, thank you. Sectarian. Secular judge, yes, go ahead.
Well, our Judeo-Christian heritage is what has determined the laws and practices that we have right now, beginning with the Ten Commandments all the way through the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. I'm convinced that the framers and founders of our country were men of God, inspired by God to write what they wrote. And so that's why we cannot allow Sharia law to be a part of our judicial system. It's based upon a completely different set of principles than the principles that we use in our judicial system. The principles that come from the Ten Commandments about how we respect each other and about how our relationship is with God. All of those, and our relationship with our neighbors, all of those then make their way into the laws that we have right now. It's too much of a slippery slope to allow Sharia law either in contracts or in covenants to somehow create a separate body of law with a separate set of procedures that are in violation of what we have. I've never been confronted, James, with the example that you posed.
The Catholic Church,
I've
yeah.
never seen that, nor has anyone ever shared that with me.
Mm.
But we have to enforce the law as it is written in the state of Texas and in our Constitution, and not go down a rabbit trail of, well, because they're both Muslim, they get to adjudicate these claims against each other in some special court.
Well, what if there was a custody where the state is basically wanting to remove custody of a teenage girl because the teenager girl says, my parents want to send me back to Pakistan where they'll have an arranged marriage and I'll be stuck in slavery in Pakistan. Would that be a justifiable basis for the state to remove custody of a child?
I think we'd have to look at each case individually. I mean, clearly the state has an interest in protecting children.
Sure.
And in that particular example, I'm not sure what the law would say about the parents' rights versus the children's rights. But we have an interest in that, certainly in that child, in that minor child.
Do you think that the parents' rights should basically get the presumption over the child's, from the state's perspective?
Parents are designated in our culture and our society to raise children up to the age of majority. And so
Right.
parents would have a great deal of influence on this, but we see every day if there's evidence of abuse or neglect, that children are removed from parents. I think there's a presumption to try to keep the family intact, and that's what we'd like to do. But if there's clear and convincing evidence, which is the standard in family law, then you might have to take the action that the parents are not being parents.
Mm. All right. That's time up. No follow-up question.
You get into my time, James.
All right.
Again, one of the questions on page 2 asks about C-scope and the plan for going forward, and you mentioned, quote, I even pushed back against my daughter's teacher. And then further on down in that paragraph, I became aware of and have been fighting C-scope specifically. So I'm curious as to what specific actions you took that were behind those words there. What specifically did you do to push back? How did you fight C-scope specifically?
In the case with my daughter's class, this was a work program that was labeled Intolerance in America. And in this exercise, you're supposed to read To Kill a Mockingbird and then go through this work paper that had been provided by the Southern Poverty Law Center, which was biased and had the presumption that America is still...
What grade was that?
I think it may have been 6th grade.
Okay.
I don't recall. The presumption of it was we're still a racist society. And as I read it, of course, To Kill a Mockingbird's a great story of the South, and Atticus Finch is the hero of all would-be attorneys. And I read that book to have a completely different moral lesson than what this study plan says. So I wrote a very long email to the teacher asking her to take a look at the Southern Poverty Law Center website and what they stand for, because I was afraid she was not informed about what the tenets of them are. And you go to their website and you can see that they characterize a lot of groups like Texas Eagle Forum as either extremist or hatred. And my daughter told me later on that exercise was not completed, that they moved on to something else. In terms of C-scope, a parent last March when I was in Corpus Christi brought to me a lesson plan of her child, who I think was in the 5th grade, provided by C-scope materials, and it was on pollution and fossil fuels. And the question was, fossil fuels are bad because, and then you fill in the blank. And the child filled in because they pollute and they're not renewable. And that got 100. That was the correct answer. And as I read into it more deeply, there were questions about things that I didn't know. For example, did you know that construction is pollution? Because it takes land that the birds and rabbits are using and converts it into something only for people. And I was so incensed by this, particularly the part about fossil fuel, that I took this lesson plan and I went back to my office and we made a video where I held up the plan and we showed the answer, and I put it up on my website to let everyone know, and I have 60,000 followers on my Facebook page, to let everyone know this is what's happening in our school. And from that's how I met Alice Linehan and Rebecca Forrest, and now am assisting them heavily in their continued battles against C-scope. I appeared on their radio program last week for an hour, and this is one of the topics that we discussed.
Okay, good. Okay.
All right, in your questionnaire, you talked about aggressively pursuing voter fraud, which is great. Are you familiar with the local road utility district case?
Refresh my memory. I have been briefed on it before, but I don't know where it currently is. I don't know what the status is.
I'm not sure.
It's on appeal.
Okay, it's on appeal.
Where somebody was actually not living there, but voted to create
so the history, as I understand it, is a congressman, or former congressman, a few years back, voted in an election, and similar sort of situation. He used an address which was not his place where he lived every night, slept every night. It was, I think, his work address or something.
Because he lived in D.C.
Right. So he used that address and said, well, that's where I'm registered to vote. He voted there. And the attorney, I guess, or state, Secretary of State, said, well, that's fine. That's a perfect interpretation of state law of what your residence is for voting purposes. And a gentleman here discovered that the local road utility district was gerrymandered in such a way that there are really only 2 active voters in the entire district. And to me, that seems pretty corrupt right there.
right.
I'm talking millions of dollars
but-
in budget.
Right, millions of dollars.
Taxing capability.
Yes.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
So what they did was they said, well, if it's okay to register where I work,
Right.
or where I, return regularly, then they decided to register there within the district. So they did that. They voted in the election, and then that upset the powers, and then they were prosecuted. and they have been, I believe, convicted, I guess now, and under
Two of
appeal.
7 have
Two
been
of
convicted.
7.
AG.
Well, a local DA looked at the case and said because of the law in Texas, because of the examples Ken was giving, that there was no basis for prosecution. And then the Attorney General, Greg Abbott, who we know on the behest of our former state senator Tommy Williams, through the governor or lieutenant governor, we're not sure about that, got the Attorney General to come get involved, and he's the one that picked up the case. So, you know, we looked at it as, why do a case that our own DA said, no, you know, there was no case for it, basis for it. So, go ahead, your question.
And on top of that, well, yeah, so the message that, you know, I guess the average citizen hears is, well, if you're connected and you're a former congressman, you can get away with stuff like this.
Right.
If you're just the average citizen, then, and you do something against the powers that be, then you're going to be prosecuted, even if the local prosecutor doesn't want you to be prosecuted.
Yeah, doesn't want to waste time.
So can you comment on that? And
You know, normally the way the state of the law is, the Attorney General's office is there to supplement the resources of the local DA. Law
Okay.
enforcement is principally a local issue. However, there are cases where the local DA has requested or doesn't have the resources or would like help. For example, in some of these rural areas like the one I was in today, where the local DA said, I've got 4 assistant prosecutors and I had hundreds of open cases. Yes, we'd love some help from your office. In 2007 and 2011, the legislature passed some additional laws to give the Attorney General a little bit more power over local law
Well, you mentioned border
prosecution.
cases.
Border cases would be one of them. Certainly where there is evidence of corruption that's
Oh,
going
yeah.
on with either the local DA or
Sure.
judges or law enforcement, the Attorney General would need to come in, should come in, because the locals are unable to do their job because of corruption. It sounds like in this case that the local DA took a look at it and passed on it. So I don't want to comment on whether he was wrong and Abbott was right or vice versa. I will tell you, the facts
Well,
of
just
it...
where the DA decides not to.
Yeah, the facts of it are a little troubling to me because I've seen a couple of situations where taxing districts are created affecting a lot of people, but only 1 or 2 people live there to actually vote for it.
It's common practice in our county.
yeah.
I mean, they even post on the local community college, Lone Star, an ad for students. They'll put you up for 6 months in a trailer, pay you, and then you vote to form a RUD at the end of it. They only need 3 people to do it.
So, for example, one of the people in this race actually carried some legislation to allow a RUD to be created up in North Texas by 1 or 2 voters who lived in a trailer or lived somewhere on the
Yeah,
property.
there you go.
And if you'll remember, Boone Pickens did this some time ago
Yeah.
when his ranch foreman and wife voted to create a large water utility that would have conveyed water from the Panhandle down to Dallas with condemnation authority.
Oh, right. That's
And
right.
the legislature rose up in anguish and angst, and in the next session repealed that law and passed a bill that wouldn't allow it to happen. So we need to be consistent. If that's the law and you can do it, then you ought to be able to do it. If we don't like it, we need to change the law
Right.
and make it very clear. This having this discretion, and then if the local DA doesn't do it, the AG comes in, it doesn't give any clarity to anybody as to what the law is,
Mm-hmm.
and the law should not be based on influence.
True.
Well, and coupled, what do we do about the people that are creating these districts? Where clearly that is corruption.
Well, my understanding is it's legal. That's the
It's
problem.
It is legal. It's legal today.
Yeah.
So it needs to be changed. If it's wrong, it needs to be changed. I think it would offend the sensibilities of most
Of course.
Texans to know that a taxing district could be created by 1 or 2 people temporarily residing within the district.
Right.
But again, that's a law-making
Yeah.
function that if it needs to be changed, it needs to be changed legislatively.
Okay. On page 2, bottom, what can or should the Attorney General's office do about illegal immigrants in the state of Texas? it seems like most of your answer focused on the illegal immigrants themselves. Do you consider them the source of the problem?
I consider breaking the law the source of the problem. As Attorney General, you're the chief law enforcement officer. You should enforce the law. And one of my principal platforms will be prosecuting crime along the border. I've spent a lot of time down there, and I'll tell you what the situation is. What we heard from the locals is that Border Patrol is not arresting or detaining people, but rather that responsibility is falling to the local deputies and constables. And they're stressed, they don't have the resources to do it. But when you come illegally into this country, you break the law. If you are on somebody's property and they ask you to leave, or you cross over a fence and there's a no trespassing sign, that's criminal trespass. You can be prosecuted for that. If you get into a county park and sleep after hours, that's a violation of the law. So my plan is to mirror what Rudy Giuliani did in New York, his broken windows theory of policing, which is we prosecute every crime that happens. Because for the most part, if you're here illegally, you're breaking the law. You're going to break the law by trespassing, cutting a fence, stealing something, driving without a driver's license. In Texas, if you are legally detained and asked to produce an ID and you don't produce it, or you tell the officer a false name or address, that's a crime.
Mm-hmm.
So we have many tools at our disposal to use to get these people off the streets. As Attorney General, those are the tools that I would use. I take some of our 4,200 people and go down and work with local DAs and law enforcement to prosecute crime.
Okay, and the direction I was heading was, basically, I think it was over the last couple of years in the Obama and some Republican-induced recession here, that a lot of illegals went back home, and that population actually went down. And then when we enjoyed the prosperity that we have here in Texas, they started coming back in. So do you think that employers could be part of the problem, and would you pursue them also?
Well, if an employer is not following the law and hiring somebody, they should be prosecuted. Let me tell you one of the other concerns we need to really focus on is people that are coming across that are not Mexicans, but are potential terrorists. And I heard a lot about this from local law enforcement. They command a premium price from the coyotes to get them across. And so they're a highly desired client. And we should be especially concerned about that. When it's so easy to get on a jet ski and go from Mexico to McAllen and drop you off and then go back and get somebody else. When there are vast swaths along the river that are complete wilderness, which enables them to stage supplies and support and food, and we're unable to clear them out because Fish and Wildlife won't let you go in and clean it out.
Mm-hmm.
Those are all problems that can be rectified, but we should be concerned about everyone who comes here illegally, but especially concerned if we've got potential terrorists coming across.
I'll come back to that. Mike?
I want to ask a short question going back to the immigration thing. So do you consider yourself, I mean, I'm guessing that you're either a lawyer type where you're arguing cases and you're studying law, or you're a manager lawyer type where you're looking at budgets and trying to, which one are you?
I'm a leader who knows how to try lawsuits. It's been my experience to lead two very big and very important agencies and do it well. And not only is there a managerial function to being the chairman of the Railroad Commission and the chairman of the PUC, we hear contested dockets. So we have many trials that we sit as judge on. Usually we'll get 100 to 200 a meeting. And in my time on both of those, I've sat in over 20,000 contested cases. The Railroad Commission is called the Supreme Court of Oil and Gas because we are rarely overturned by the court. So I have this unique experience, Brian, of being a seasoned manager, leader, but also a darn good trial lawyer.
So back on the immigration issue, what can the Attorney General do? To me, one of the problems is you've got, you know, U.S. Border Police Patrol that are, you know, thrown out there and they can't shoot, and they, you know, they get thrown in jail every time they defend themselves and all that. What's your commitment? I mean, you got federal and you got state. What does the federal government, do they have a territory that they can patrol? Can the state restrict that so that the state can come in and patrol, you know, a mile in, or what's your commitment and what's your thoughts on, you know, the state taking over because the U.S. is doing a poor job?
We've effectively taken over. I mean, DPS runs gunboats up and down the river right now. Border Patrol, for the most part, is a charade. They're on horseback and helicopters, but they're not arresting or detaining people, from what I've been told, in my experience down there. So our local law enforcement is doing the job right now. They're the ones making the arrest. Once you arrest somebody, you can then ask for ID, you can fingerprint them, you can run it through the system and see if they've been here before. You can then start the deportation process if they're here illegally. It's not that difficult. What we've attempted to do with Border Patrol and putting up the fence and all that, it doesn't work. In McAllen, the wall is about a half a mile from the river. You know, the river meanders, and when they put up the wall, they oftentimes cut somebody's property in two. So their answer to resolving that is to put a gate in it. But they didn't supply any gates, so it's just an opening. At one point, they put the wall where there's a levee for flood control, but there's a road that goes over it. So the wall doesn't do any good. It is going to be up to our local constables and deputies to arrest people, and they have a lot of tools. You can detain someone if they are acting in a suspicious manner. Completely legal. You can ask them for ID once you've detained them. They have to supply that. If they act in a furtive manner, you can arrest and search them. You can take them downtown and book them. We just have to make a commitment to do